Well, good evening, everybody. It's Chris here from the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta. What'd you think of my little intro video? You never get an intro video, but I did one this time. One of the reasons I did that was because I think this is a really special and important episode we're going to do here tonight. Please share this to your social medias if you don't mind. The reason for that is I've come to realize that there's times when people have a choice whether they're going to do the easy thing or they're going to do the hard thing, and lots of times the hard thing involves truth and uncomfortable things that people don't want to talk about. And when people stand up and do the right thing and start speaking the truth, oftentimes it doesn't go well for them. And it was very difficult in my situation, albeit for a short time, when I stood up against what the government was doing, because so many people joined me right away. But Jim McMurtry, who is my guest tonight, he is still going through this. I mean, he stood up and he spoke out, and he spoke some truth of which he knows very well. And he was fired, he was persecuted, he was dragged through the mud, all sorts of things. So I thought, what better place for Jim to share his story than on the Whistle Stop Cafe Chris and Carrie Show podcast. Although Carrie's not here because he's doing karaoke. It's Friday, so he's doing karaoke in Airdrie. I always get it wrong and he gets mad at me. It's either Airdrie or Chestermere. I'm pretty sure it's Airdrie tonight. So if you get a chance and you're in either of those places, pop into either Dockside or Wildcard Shack, and at one of those places you're going to find Carrie. It'll be like Christmas, but don't try and unwrap him. He doesn't like that. We're not going to talk about that anymore. Anyhow, we should get on with it. Without further ado, I would like to welcome my new friend, Mr. McMurtry. And I call him Mr. McMurtry because he's a teacher, and that's what we do, right?
Well, thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming out to Alberta too. I met you in Morningside. You had a bit of an audience there, and you delivered a message there. It was really intriguing, and you got out a lot of information, but I certainly left wanting to know more. Specifically, why in the world did a guy decide to abandon all caution and speak the truth in a day when speaking truth is not permitted?
Well, maybe I'm not very smart, Chris. That's also a possibility. And but in my situation, I didn't do this consciously. The psychologists say that it's often your behavior that comes before your attitude. And so the attitude is really a rationalization of one's behavior. I didn't try and get fired. I was rather cautious. But once it happened, I just looked in the mirror and realized that I'm just too old to. Had a bit of a Jean Valjean moment as in Les Miserables, the idea of, I'm going to live my truth. And that was also in Hamlet, Polonius to Laertes, to above all else, to thine own self be true. So I'm being true to myself. And I think my story is kind of interesting, and it's long from over. But I have a lot of adversaries. It's very much a David Goliath thing, but sometimes It's good to be a David.
Well, I like what you said there. I watched the RFK documentary on Angel Studios. Fantastic. If you haven't seen it, folks, you should watch that. Check it out on Angel Studios. It's called RFK Legacy. Great documentary. RFK says in there, he's being asked, why did you do this? Well, you knew you're throwing your career away by fighting these fights, and you knew it wasn't going to go. Why'd you do it? And he said, when I was a kid, my father handed me a book called The Plague. And when he gave it to me, he was more adamant that I read this than really any other book. And he wondered why. So he read the book a few times, and the book is about a doctor who is, there's a plague, like a horrible plague. It's killing people, and this doctor can help. But he knows that if he goes outside and tries to help the people, he's going to get the plague and die too. But in the end, he does it because it's his duty. And RFK was like, sometimes we just do these things because that's what we're meant to do. It's our duty, and there might be consequences, but we do it anyway. because that's who we are. And I think that really applies to what you're experiencing, and actually your new friends, Francis Widdowson and Dallas Brody, experiencing the same thing. So, Jim, if you don't mind, can you just kind of explain a little bit of who you are, um, what what were you doing when this all started, and how it came about?
Well, it's a tremendous delight and honor to do so and to be with you again, Chris. So the Canada, so after the George Floyd event or moment in American history, Canada wanted to have its similar situation where everybody could be performative together, could grieve together about something that pointed out our own terrible weaknesses, our original sin of being bad to minority groups. So we created that in Canada recently with Indigenous people. And it's not just residential schools. It's really everything about how we've been with Indigenous people are supposed to be bad. So when they had an opportunity to really, again, to be performative, which was when the news outlets around the world talked about discovery of 215 child remains in Kamloops, and then it expanded, some as young as 3 buried by 6-year-olds at night, all put in a mass grave, secretly hidden for all these years. And I didn't believe it because I, from family, my grandmother and my father were historians. My father also was for a long time the Chief Justice of Ontario, a man of, that didn't set me straight when it comes to being proud about country and ancestors and how lucky I am to be in Canada at this age and in human history and what a beautiful democracy and so forth. So anyhow, when it came about, I was in school and I was teaching math, and the principal was going, "Oh my gosh, we got to hammer this home." And asked all the teachers and kids to wear orange and tear their hair out over this story of, obviously a horrendous story. But I studied for a long time in university, and Canadian history, and I knew that the story was false, that there was never any child murdered by teachers anywhere, particularly in residential schools. There were never any bodies found, never any kids buried at Kamloops. So the whole story was very much a hoax, but they walked me out within half an hour of saying that those kids who were enrolled at the Kamloops Indian Residential School and who died tragically from disease, fire accidents, did not do so for murder. I mean, it wasn't about murder. And so they walked me out. It was almost 5 years ago, and I haven't taught since, and I never will. And it's been hard at times. Gotten over it, but, tough to lose one's reputation. But as you said, it's what I do. I'm good with kids. I never will lie to them. And then you start realizing, oh my gosh, look at all the things they're doing. And just I say very quickly, Chris. So they're lying about race. They're making it seem as though kids are going to be defined. Their whole lives are going to be determined by their race. They're talking about kids, about their sexual orientation, taking kids in kindergarten all over the place.
Yeah, young kids.
Young kids, the pronouns are with my 3-year-old, they're indoctrinating my 3-year-old grandson. They'll come back to them in a second. Indigenization with the daily land acknowledgements and this constant, you're on stolen land and you're wicked because of, your ancestors commit this original sin, particularly against Indigenous people, but also, of course, against Blacks and the Chinese head tax and Komagata Maru against Sikhs and St. Louis being turned around in 1939 against the Jews. And anyhow, I could go on for a long time about how terrible we are as a country if I was to follow that script. This is then there's all these other things that are going wrong, which I'll get a chance to mention. But what I want to say here is that I'm incredibly proud of one thing, and that is that I didn't do what I was being coached to do by friends, family, certainly by my union and others, and that was find a way to get back in the classroom by surrendering a little bit of yourself. And I love the expression, I'd rather die like a man on my feet than live like a slave. on my knees. And so this was my moment, and my moment to say, you're doing these things wrong. So I've already mentioned race and gender and the trans stuff and the prying into kids' deepest, darkest secrets, the Indigenous stuff, and all the literature that's disappearing, all the history that's being perverted, all the dead people that are being defamed, the loss of academic values, of discipline in schools, how it's no longer the sage on the stage, but kids sitting around doing very little, or doing a project or whatever, getting rid of grades, getting rid of competition, getting rid of marking based on race. I mean, I could go on for a long time. It's just, I'm in a nice position right now because I realize there's an audience. There's a lot of people in Canada that are pleased to see a Dallas Brody, to see a Francis Whittleson, to see, of course, earlier Jordan Peterson, an Amy Ham, a nurse in British Columbia here, and another teacher who stood up after she was forced out of the system, Chanel Fall, and Ottawa. I mean, it's not about me, but there's not many of us. There's not many, because they will crush you. They will take away everything. And you saw that, particularly, of course, people in Alberta with the Coots thing. But when I lived in Surrey, and when the truckers convoy was getting going and so forth, I really, I don't know why I wasn't following it very closely, but all of a sudden it moved. There was this big protest being organized at the truck crossing in Surrey with the American border. And I said, I'm going to go to that, and I'm going to wear, get a Canadian flag and all that kind of stuff. I could not get to the protest. And I tried it. And there was another protest. I couldn't get to it. Both times there were too many people where I live trying to get there. So I was literally miles away from the protest, because all of Surrey, it seemed, was trying to get to the protest.
That was awesome.
In other words, and then the truckers get to Ottawa, and the political elite in Canada label them insurrectionists, racist, misogynist, just evil people. And so this is how out of touch the people who run our institutions are, and the school system is no different. The school system.
You know what? I got to interrupt you there. I got to get this out before I forget. You know what I noticed? You mentioned that the institutions are the ones that are condemning these people, right? You mentioned earlier that people are being made to be ashamed of our country because of what happened to the Chinese people and Indigenous and the Sikhs and all these other groups, right? But it's very interesting that those groups are literally they're selling everything they have where they're from to come here, right? So it's not this horrible place for them. They want to be here because this is a good place to be. And you know who it is that's condemning people and talking about these things and trying to make us be ashamed of who we are? It's people in the elite of those institutions that will never feel the pain or the consequence of being shamed for their existence.
Oh my gosh, you're just hitting it right in the head. That's just so brilliant. And so when people who are happy with the manipulation of children, especially children in school and all through our society, and the noose around free speakers getting tighter and tighter, and you kind of go, this isn't the Canada I know. Don Cherry being canceled for simply saying wear a poppy, guys. I mean, it's just not the Canada that I knew. And what's interesting here is the people who are wanting to prop this up. Oh, like our premier in British Columbia, he was saying, oh, we have to do this reconciliation. That's so important. And people in BC, we're losing our land. We're losing our crown land, our public land, our private property. And he's going, but reconciliation, 100 years ago, we treated kids badly in residential schools. And you go, whoa, first of all, we're asking you to preserve, not to give away Canada. So forget the reconciliation. A lot of us don't even want the reconciliation. That's just a farce.
I just want to start with the truth.
That's theater. That's pantomime. There's no reconciliation. The more you talk about reconciliation, the more you're going to have a civil war in Canada. People come to my house to take my property. It's not going to go over well. So the reconciliation is just garbage. But he does it on the pretext or the pretense. Residential schools are really bad. So that's why I met you, because I went out to Kamloops and then traveled, Alberta. There's the pretense that we were terrible again with all our minorities, even with slavery, and yet Canada and Ontario in 1793 had an act to abolish the slave trade internationally. It was the British who built Canada in large part. They're the ones that stamped it out. Slavery, which was every part of the world, stamped out. So in other words, everything they're doing is the opposite of what they say it is. But we're a great country. And the people who are saying, as you said, and I'm going to end on this note, the people who are going, no, it's not, we're racist and we're terrible and we should give away all our land and give away all our taxes and give everything to people who are just going to turn, give it to the Chinese. It's the idea that you're right, they're not going to be hurt. The number of people who are really placed going, oh, I don't mind if my children can't get work because they're white or because they're this or that. And I'm going, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you're never going to be affected. You can sing this woke song as much as you want. But what about the average person right now that can't find work easily? You know, who's wondering if, am I going to lose my house? Look, I live now I've moved from Surrey next door to Delta, south of Vancouver. And I'm south of, it goes Vancouver, Richmond, Delta. And in Delta, there's a band that owns half my town already. And it's just a matter of time before they're going to claim all of it. And then the North Richmond, they just lost a huge chunk of Richmond, a lot of it called Lulu Island, worth $100 billion. And there's this group is going to come in, a small group of people, and they're only one of 5 that are going to be making claims on it. And who knows? There's soon there'll be 10 groups. They're going to, this idea of giving away to one small race of people and giving them special rights that nobody else has. It's a recipe for how to not only destroy Canada, but to end up in a violent civil war.
Yeah, and this whole idea of this happening, they didn't build what they're taking. They didn't develop any of this. I mean, we're talking nomadic tribes with no written language, hadn't even discovered the wheel, right there. And now they're talking about giving them $100 billion worth of property. It's absolute madness. Now, I do want to stop for a second and point out that yes, 100%, the First Nations people in this country oftentimes got a bad deal. There is no question about that. But what I'm saying and what Jim is saying is that what was this construct that was rammed down people's throats through the media, that there was this genocide. And actually the Supreme Court even used the word in a ruling, and they called it a cultural genocide, which isn't the same thing as wiping out a bunch of people. It's created this context in which people are willing to sacrifice their own children to make it right, even though there was the wrong wasn't there. I watched a video of Francis Widdowson trying to have a conversation with a First Nations kid. I think it was in Winnipeg, and like he spat on her or something. He said, "Where's your evidence that this stuff didn't happen?" And she said, "Well, that's not how this works. Like, you're making the claim that it happened. You have to provide the evidence that it actually happened." And now people, they see you, and I know I'm going to hear this in comments. I'm going to get, well, where's Jim's evidence that this stuff never happened? How does that part work?
Well, if anyone does ask that, and it's a great question. All questions are, for me as a teacher, are important to ask. But I'm not accusing anybody of murdering anybody. I'm not accusing the men and women, Christian men and women who worked in residential schools of having murdered, tortured as well, disappeared up to 25,000 or more Indigenous kids. So I would say the onus is on the person who is making the charge. Now, how do I know? Quite apart from that, how do I know there are no burials there? Because the Truth and Reconciliation said there were 51 children that died at the school, and they list their names and so forth. So I went in with a research team. I have a PhD. I'm connected with people in a research group that extends from one coast to the next. And we looked at the 51 names, and we realized there are only 47 because there are 4 duplications. And then we looked at the death records, which the TRC never did, and we found out that there were only 2 deaths at the school, and they were both accidents, and it was very sad. And there was an inquest, and there was, the kids were buried in their home reserves, and there was just nothing untoward. So my point is, there's no evidence that there's a single kid that was tortured, murdered, missing, disappeared. There's not a single name of, there's anyone come forward saying, what about this kid? We never knew about this kid. And the parents wondered whatever happened to their child. There's none of that, nowhere. And that's the sad thing. The sad thing. So when people say wrong things happen to Indigenous people, I would say, a friend of mine said, maybe you heard me say this before, but his great-great-grandfather came out into Manitoba, into the wild prairies long ago. It was tough. He lost 2 of his children to wolves. I mean, the life was hard. And then it got particularly hard in the late 80s for 1880s for Indigenous people out west, as you know. And what did the Canadian government did? It gave more in its food program, in its famine relief for Indigenous people than every single any department in the federal government at the time, except for 2. It was spending more on giving food rations to Indigenous people in the western part of Canada than it was spending on national defense. So when people say the wrong that happened in Canada, well, absolutely, I'm sure there was wrong with all groups. But what about all the wonderfully good things that were done? And I just posted today on X, I have an account there, that there's a letter from an Indian agent asking if they can expand the size of the Kamloops residential school from 125 to 150 because, quote, people are clamoring to have their children admitted there. And then it moved all the way up to 500. Parents were clamoring to have their children admitted. This idea that the residential schools were sinful is just absurd, because the most important thing if you want to do for any child, and we still do it, is to educate the child, give the child written language, the ability to read, to think, to calculate. I mean, it's just, I can't see anything that was wrong outside of, I'm sure there were some swindlers over land. I'm sure there was, there was contact, but there's never any war from Canada against, an Indigenous tribe. There are 50 massacres in the US. There is nothing in Canada. I mean, we are, as you said earlier, really beautifully, Canada is a country everybody wants to come to. We don't need to make a case for it. People are smart enough. Look, if I've traveled enough the world. I lived in Europe for a long time. I've been to places like Taiwan recently. That you can't drink the water there. You can't even put your dirty toilet paper in the toilet because it might. You got all the. The food. Often it's just cooked on the street there. The fish they raise in ponds, fertilized by human and animal waste. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're so lucky in Canada, and why would we allow these woke high priests to come into our institutions and to turn everybody against, particularly children, and turn them against their own country? That's what Hitler and Mussolini did, and other leaders in the beginning of time. And they have them all in their orange shirts or their black shirts or their, depending on the occasion, red shirts, pink shirts, white shirts, green shirts. Anyhow, they're just taking kids and they're making them into a herd. A herd that doesn't think, and it all moves together. And the moment a kid asks a tough question in school, the kid could get in trouble. And if the teacher asks a tough question, the teacher can end up like me.
Yeah, we see that a lot. Here's the conspiracy prophet in me coming out now. But you mentioned how they're turning people this way, and why? Well, there's this idea floating around in the globalist kind of circles that Western civilization needs to be torn down. We need to tear everything down and build back better. And what better way to tear down a society than make that society hate itself and tear itself down? That's what's going on right now. People are literally doing it for them. They don't even have to lift a finger. And that's actually one of the things, one of the rules for radicals is to make your enemy divide itself or devour itself from within.
Divide and conquer. Yeah, if I could just expand on that, and you're absolutely right. when I was in university and I went to grad school for much of the 80s, and I remember hearing this one term, deconstructionism, and they kept talking about it. I didn't really understand it at the time, but it's always about decolonialism, deconstruction. DE means to take away from. You know, it's like the word destroy. What they're doing is they're stripping Canada apart. They're changing our history. They're changing our signs. They're knocking down our statues. They're not teaching history, Canadian history in school. You can BC, you know, they encourage you to Chinese history, Indian, you know, from India history. They just do anything but Canadian. They don't want us, and they don't want us to be proud about anything. And then you think about the people, particularly all the mass immigration that's happened, and they're all voting Liberal, for example. And it's just sort of a fascinating thing that people like Trudeau, reincarnation of Trudeau, it's all about getting new people to come in here and giving them the roles and the power and dismissing. Like, you know what, if I were an old white person, I think I'd still be teaching. You know, I mean, all the teachers being run out of the school system in British Columbia that I know, probably right across Canada, you know, are people with my birth characteristics. So it's a replacement. And it's not though they want to really have the Indigenous have all the land or have the immigrants have all the land or whatever. I think it's really, as you said, it's what Charles Manson talked about. Charles Manson, who was a horrible psychopath, but he was also somebody who was able to have an entourage, a family, the Manson family, because he was smart and very clever. And one thing he said is he's going to create a race war between blacks and whites through his killing in Los Angeles and elsewhere. And then during that chaos, which he called Helter Skelter, he was going to come in and he was going to play savior. And he was going to be Jesus Christ reincarnated. This is what Trudeau did. Trudeau has gone out to various native bands like the Chilcotin in the interior of BC on a horse. You know, you've seen him taking
like a literal horse,
on a black horse riding in, you know, like Peter on a donkey or Jesus going around, you know, an itinerant early Jewish mystic or whatever, and spreading the word of. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating how people fall for these people who
just eat it up.
And we know that the more power you give certain people, just the more they're going to seize for themselves. It all becomes all about them. It's a very dangerous thing. Power corrupts, and absolute power tends to corrupt. Absolutely. That's Lord Acton. And we're seeing that in Canada. These institutional leaders go, oh my gosh, superintendent in schools are being paid up to $400,000 and $500,000 a year. University professors almost as much. University presidents $1 million a year, and in the U.S. it's many millions in some cases. Like these people who are running our institutions, all our institutions, public institutions, whether it's hydro or whatever, these are people who are incredibly well paid. And what they're doing is they're going, what can we do to keep this and expand on it? And one of the things that they figured out is to make everything about feelings, make everything about, just let's focus on feelings and making everybody happy. You know, like it's Brave New World, we're going to drug everybody. But more than that, they're virtue signaling. They're saying, look at us. We're virtuous people because we're saying the focus should not be on successful white people or European people or whatever. We need to spread it out. We need to redistribute it. We need to give all the opportunities to scholarships, to special programs, all the advantages to Indigenous kids, for example. And they're doing it and getting away with the idea that they're doing something that is actually helping Indigenous people. If anyone cares about Indigenous people, then they would stop this nonsense about special rights and special anything. The only way they're going to be successful, like the Chinese that have come here, or the Indians, or people from many parts of the world, is that they come here and assume the same rights and responsibilities. You're never going to make a reserve a nice place to live if you're simply handing out money. No time at all, it's going to be what it's become, which is a haven for international criminal organizations, a den of people who sell fentanyl, which killed my nephew, bought from, his fentanyl was given to him by a guy on a reserve. You think of the fetal alcohol syndrome, you think of the lack of employment, you think of the suicides, you think of the sexual abuse, the incest, you think of all the problems and reserves, and you go, you know what? It's not a good idea to take away from people responsibility, accountability. And so I think, and people call me a racist, but I'm the only one in this argument. And I mean, when I'm arguing these people who is not racist, you would never in a classroom as a teacher ever treat people differently based on ancestry or race, skin color, religion, gender, sexual orientation. You never did stuff like that. It's only these monstrously imbecilic people who have taken over institutions. And people like Carney and Trudeau, one of the recent things Carney wants to do is he wants to have special programs to get more non-white people into farming in Canada. Now, of course, it's stupid. Who cares what color skin people are at farming? And they're
they just did that in South Africa. They could take a page out of that playbook.
Well, this is what they're doing. But you go, why are they doing that? And you go, oh, wait a second. Recent immigrants, they vote for the Liberals. I mean, this is, but it's so awful. This idea, you're right. It's just, that's reconciliation is the term that, in truth, and reconciliation comes from South Africa directly. This idea of putting people into the caste system or an apartheid in South Africa, that's what they're doing in Canada is very serious. But my expertise and the reason you might have wanted me on tonight is relating to schools. I can condemn the recent changes in our society, but I like to focus on schools I've already done. If anybody listening thinks it's a normal thing for a teacher to say, my 3-year-old daycare teacher said to him about, kids having their hair cut off and being ripped away from their mother's arms. The kid's 3 is going home and asking his mother, is this going to happen to him? The horror stories they're telling kids about residential school, but the main one for me isn't the one that I'm fighting on, but I have stood against it for almost 10 years. I mean, I was completely alone. I'm sure there were others in some other schools and some other places, but I was alone because I didn't know about these other people. But there are two things. One, they had drag queens coming into schools, as you know, and they're bouncing little kids on their laps. I mean, they're getting aroused, having little kids, and the parents and the teachers are thinking this was so cute and so progressive and so advanced that we're bringing in
sacrificing their children.
Yeah, sacrificing their children. They're like Pied Piper and giving them to the Pied Piper, all to show, oh my gosh, my kid's trans. Isn't that wonderful? I'm really, really progressive and forward thinking and enlightened. The second thing, and the last thing here is asking kids again about maybe they're in the wrong body. It's just unbelievable. I would have thought 10 years ago, if I had ever said to some little kid at school, maybe you're in the wrong body, you should consider changing. I would think that the dad anyway would have come into the school and, given me a big punch in the head. That's what I thought Canadian men did when people were trying to, pervert or seduce or whatever, just completely ruin their child. But you did that today. Parents are going to come in because they're so afraid of this woke monster. Everybody's afraid of this with this new system. They're going to go, oh well, I'm uncomfortable with this. Can we talk about it? And maybe maybe I should go to the principal. And we've just become so timid as a country. We've just allowed these things to happen. So that's the great thing about Dallas Brody and the One BC Party in BC. It's a small group, and it's going to grow of people who are just saying, there's a line here, folks. There's no special rights. We're getting rid of the Indian Act. We're changing the Constitution. We're going to put in jail anybody who tries to transition a child. Anyone who talks to kids below a certain age should, is going to be fined or jailed. I'm just talking about common sense coming back.
I almost wonder if nowadays in the staff room at the schools, there's like a board with all the teachers' names. And every time a teacher convinces a kid that they're trans, they maybe get a gold star, and then they get a award at the end of the year or something like that. It's almost like, nowadays, if you have a trans kid in your family or in your life, it's a badge. It's a medal that you get to wear to show how progressive you are and how much more elevated you are than, than others. But you're right.
Maybe,
10 years ago, there would have been some probably serious violence going on when this stuff was happening.
and in 10 years, there'll be serious violence again. It's just a strange, delusion that just captures society, and people don't find a way out of it because they go, if I speak up, whether you're a lawyer, doctor, whatever powerful position you have, you go, if I speak up, I could lose my job, lose my license, I could be demoted, or I'll miss the promotion, or like everybody's afraid to say something.
My pension.
Yes, all these things that you're right. But you're a really smart guy. The one thing I just want to say on here, this is how the school system works. And again, this is my only expertise. So everything else I say to you is probably not so crystallized. And that is, the principal doesn't win school league championships. But if the school goes out and wins the provincial championship or whatever, city championship in soccer, he'll go into the school, and there'll be a staff meeting and a big assembly. There'll be all these things, and he'll go into the district and go to the meeting of the principals, and everything. Our school won the soccer title, like this, and that's real, and it's all way of showering. He didn't get on the field and kick a ball or get any goals, but he's just obviously drawing from what he can. He's just milking it for his own advantage. And you're absolutely right. That's what they do with trans kids. They run it up the flag. The more trans kids you have in a school, the more progressive the school, and the happier the people that are going to be at the top of the society. Because what they're trying to do right now is they're trying to win converts to this new religion. And there's no better convert than some sad, socially excluded girl who by nature is kind of a bit of a follower, who doesn't fit in. And all of a sudden she's being offered to friendship and companionship and a teacher's time in a club at lunch. And then they start going in about, maybe you'd be happier if we talked about certain things. And there's a real grooming program in schools. I never could understand why it was a good idea to have more trans kids, or to have more gay kids, or to have more kids who hated Canadian society, or have more kids who thought that, their own race was racist, or the other white people were monsters. I never understand how that was the currency of that. Where's the value in that? But that's what they've done for the last 5 to 10 years. They have rewarded all the wrong things. They have kids in schools remembering colors on a pride flag and not learning their timetables, not learning basic facts.
I'll share with you a quick story, and then I want to circle back to, actually, I want to talk about Mark Carney's father a little bit. I was at a school in Northern Alberta. And Northern Alberta is pretty redneck, oil field, agriculture kind of thing, right? Salt of the earth people. And I walked into this school, and I went over to the trophy case because I wanted to see what kind of sports was going on. And they're usually full of all sorts of shiny things. Not one trophy in there. Do you know what was in there? There was 2 spectrum posters, one for sexual identity and one for sexual orientation. That's what was in the trophy case. And it hit me like a freight train. And I know what that feels like because that's happened to me before, that this is what's happened. They've taken away kids, their feeling of self-worth, of accomplishing difficult things and getting rewarded and getting trophies. And they've replaced it with a false sense of accomplishment where all a kid has to do is say, yeah, I'm in that group. And now all of the sudden they have worth and they have value that they didn't have before. And it doesn't matter that, they're going to end up doing things to their bodies that is irreversible and causing them mental health problems later, because they're kids. But the adults should know better, and the adults aren't speaking up. And actually, here's another thing. I'm going to get sidetracked a bit. Alberta is speaking up. At the last AGM for the United Conservative Party of Alberta, they actually voted on policy around protecting kids from trans ideology. And we told our government, we're done with this. We're not going to be silent anymore. We want the government to stand up and start protecting kids from these woke activists who would sacrifice them to make their realities closer to them. So our premier just passed some laws banning puberty blockers for any kid under 16, banning gender reassignment surgery for any kid under 18. And these are common sense, normal things that everybody should support. And the unions in this province and the NDP and the Liberals are screaming from the rooftops because the government won't let them touch the kids. And now people are starting to realize, like, whoa, okay, this is what these people want. They literally want our children. So when you mention these things, I know we're talking about your views on, or your truth about residential schools and those types of things, but it's so connected because it's just one more conversation that's used to drive a wedge in between people so that we can't agree on something as agreeable as protecting children. Instead, we fight while they strip things away from us, and that's really important to notice.
Well, I think it's just mass distraction. It's just absolutely. I'm absolutely shocked. Like Trudeau going around being this wonderful savior for the environment, for the climate, and he's just going everywhere in a jet.
Jet, yeah.
And I mean, there's the complete hypocrisy of these guys like Carney, and so that leads into maybe the Mark Carney's father thing. But Mark Carney is the same. He's a guy who's talking about, I'm going to elbows up. And of course, he's a sycophant with Trump. I mean, what is it that's real about any of these people? It's just such rank hypocrisy. I care about Canada. I'm a Canadian nationalist. And it's just not true, because a guy like Carney, he spent a little time in Canada. I'm sure when he's outside of Canada, he's going, well, I'm going to be prime minister for a while. Might get me an even bigger job one day. But, he has no idea what an ordinary Canadian is like. So, yes, my thesis supervisor was Robert Carney, Mark's father. And he never said a single thing wrong about residential schools that I can remember. I mean, they were not great. There was, you never have a school 100 years ago that or even now that hits every box, checks every. I mean, there's always kids falling through sadly the cracks. I mean, schools are hard. You can't reach all 30 kids in a classroom. The principal can't make sure all 2,000 kids in the school are safe and aren't going to do drugs and aren't going to get pregnant as teens. I mean, there's just so many challenges out there. Kids aren't going to cut themselves or kill themselves in the road. So it was always, Robert Carney was all about, how can we make education policy better? How can we make better day schools and residential schools, or any type of schools, community schools, for Indigenous kids better? And that's a sensible thing. I've never said that Canada has done a perfect job with Indigenous people or any group of people. But the way to do it is to sit down and think of what's a better way of doing it. And then they go, well, we'll turn it over to Indigenous people. Well, the Indigenous people didn't have schools. So I don't understand that. It is so counterintuitive. It's like the parent who's concerned about my child being groomed at school and going, I'm going to write to Trudeau. I'm going to write to our Carney now. I'm going to write to my premier. I'm by the way, 16 being allowed to take puberty blockers at 16 is still not right for me. They're still children, but anyhow, it's a great start. And Danielle Smith is, she's meeting a lot of resistance. So all the power to her, and I hope she goes further. But I mean, it's just such hypocrisy. But the number of parents that meet with me are, because I'm out about, I'm trying so hard not to win my case as much as I am to try and, save Canada. And I'll meet people and say, are you aware of what's happening in schools? And they go, oh yeah, I'm going to go tell the principal right now. And I'm going, oh my gosh, the principal's part of the problem. Mm-hmm. The principal didn't get to be principal by being disobedient. The principal is a conformist and a compliant individual who's licking the hands of the people above him because that's where he wants or she wants to be, because it's more money, power, fame, and all that stuff.
Yeah. Mark Carney's father. Sorry, when you said licking the hands of the people above him, it actually reminded me of there's a part in the Quran that talks about you're supposed to lick your friends' fingers after they finish eating, And I don't know why that popped into my mind, but anyway, Mark Carney's father. Okay, so, and actually, before we get into that, I want to ask you one more question. Of course, there were terrible things that happened in residential schools. There were terrible things that happened to the kids, the
I
parents,
don't
all
accept
sorts of
that.
things.
Can I say it? I don't accept that.
That there weren't terrible things.
What evidence is there of what evidence
Well,
is it?
okay, so my son's grandmother,
Yeah.
rest her soul, she was in a residential school in northern Alberta, and it wasn't a pleasant experience for her. And I'm not saying that this is something just that happened in these schools. I mean, things happen in England, things happen in Ireland, they happened all over the world. But there were things that were unpleasant for a lot of people. What would you say to the people that either experienced those things or have family members who did, and they now have this emotional bias that precludes the necessity of evidence to back up the claims of things like genocide and murder? How would you approach those people?
Okay, you're taxing my brain with such clever questions. What my issue is, and it's not, and I know, look, we know each other now. We're in agreement on all these things, but I just want for your audience to know that I don't think it's acceptable to start any conversations about residential schools by saying that they were bad things happen. No, it's moving on. The school that I last taught in Surrey, there were probably the two schools I taught in Surrey for a number of years. There are probably 10 kids students of mine that died. 10. Two kids I was really close to, Bobby Shergill and Angus Epp. Like, these are kids that were just like children to me. Muscular dystrophy, died before they got out of their teens. I went to their funerals. There was a boy named Raphael, lovely boy from the Philippines, best athlete at the school at the time, died during a basketball game. I mean, if you want to see death, if you want to see kids on drugs, if you want to see sad cases, kids sleeping on streets, kids being beat up, girls being assaulted, just go to your regular high school today. I mean, it's there. You know, they're going to hide it. They're going to hide it from you, but it's there. My point is, there is that side to all societies. You come to Vancouver and you go, oh, the mountains are so beautiful and like that. And then you go, okay, walk East Hastings. And then, but you don't, no one starts talking about Vancouver and going, well, you know, it's horrible what's happening with the homeless in East, you know, and East Hastings and on the east side of Vancouver. Nobody does that. They say Vancouver's a beautiful thing. And then maybe down later, they'll start saying, well, of course it has problems like every school or every city. That's, to me, what we need to do with residential schools. You talk about a grandmother. Well, my grandmother, she was beat in school if she didn't curtsy when her nun teacher walked by her in the hallway. She didn't curtsy, she was hit. So look, I recognize schools were stricter back in time, but I just and apologize for doing this, but it's just important to me that I think if we're going to have a sensible adult discussion in Canada about residential schools, we can't allow our leaders, like that horrible guy, Eby, in British Columbia, where I live, to open his mouth every time and go, residential schools are despicable, therefore we're going to take your houses. We just have to, they're not. There's the evidence of residential schools is overwhelmingly positive. It's overwhelmingly positive, just like the schools where these students died of mine. And of course, other teachers had students that die. We regularly had staff meetings because a kid died at the school, hit by a car or whatever, killed himself. I mean, yes, but we don't do that about our public schools today. We don't go around saying about, you know, the kids that are, all the horrible things that are happening. And that's why I don't understand the residential schools. This is just a con job. There were no children murdered. There were no children disappeared. There were no children that ever were missing. People have researched that. I can tell you by name. I can tell you by age. Anything about, for example, Kamloops, the two kids that died. You know, Pearl Joe and Adrian George. I can tell you. I could talk about their families. Like, my point is, their death certificates. There's nothing nefarious. So this is me, Chris. This is me. I think we need to get to the point as a country where we get rid of all the lies, including about residential schools. And we say, but if people are right now interested in residential schools, then absolutely I acknowledge everything you say, because everything you say to me is excellent. But I acknowledge, of course, bad things happen at residential schools, just like bad things happen at all schools. But the kids, for the most part, did not die at the school, and they did not die at the hands of teachers, and they were cared for and loved at the schools. And the woman who started the Orange Shirt Day, about her, she's quite a fascinating case, because Phyllis, because Webstad, because she never went to residential school. And then there's the book, with the book that Channy or Charlie Wenjack, and this poor boy, and they Gord Downey made him into a song and poem and a book that they're in every school. The boy, he died because of an Indigenous couple that abandoned him in the woods. I mean, everything is wrong. That's what Orwell predicted a long time ago, that war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is truth. Inclusion is exclusion. Diversity is the opposite of diversity. It's only one thought. And equity is not equity at all. It's not fair. It's just, completely, it's just pounding one group to raise another group up.
Well, that concept is actually rooted in scripture as well. In the end times, truth will be persecuted, lies will be celebrated, things are upside down. Yeah, it's a scriptural thing.
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. I'm going to remember. I'm going to steal that from you. I'll give you credit if you want. That is so beautiful.
It wasn't me that wrote it. I think it was Paul.
Oh, but I'm going to go look at that. That's just absolutely beautiful. Things are upside down. Things are upside down in residential school. So when I went to the residential school and I saw it, it's an absolutely gorgeous building. It was built a century ago. Originally the original building burned down, and the one that they replaced is a century old, and it's this beautiful brick building. Like, it's so much more attractive than any public school I've been in, and anyhow, it's unbelievable. And certainly any public school, 100 years ago. And then they had a swimming pool. The reason they had a swimming pool is because one of the kids I told you about, died in the river, and they had a swimming pool so no other kid would die in the river. The kids would know how to swim. Like, it was a place where they had reunions. They took kids to Mexico and got some kids to compete in the Olympics. They had kids doing tremendous things. They had dances and plays and musical performance. Why don't we start talking about residential schools as they were, which were schools that they did their darndest at the time to give these kids a leg up in life. Did things go wrong? Well, of course, yeah. So if we want to talk about that, there was only one priest that was ever convicted. You've got 143 schools over 113 years, and only one priest. There are priests in all these schools, only priests or ministers. Only one was ever convicted, where there was actually evidence to convict the person. No, I'm not saying there were others might not have been guilty. I'm simply saying that other bad things happen. There's some supervisors and older students sometimes preying younger students. As it happened in boarding schools back in the Mount Cashel. It has nothing to do with Indigenous people, but there are lots of victims. I'm just wanting to look at this. During the latter decades of the Kamloops Indian residential school, particularly the 60s and 70s, they had Indigenous teachers. They had an Indigenous principal. Most of the staff probably were Indigenous. The cooks, the cleaners, the dormitory supervisors, the carpenters, the plumbers. They're local people. The school, Kamloops, was right in the heart of the reserve.
Well, and by the mid 80s, most of the residential schools in Canada were run by the Indian bands themselves.
Yeah, and most were gone by the 60s. So I know there's some left. So you're absolutely right. The last one was closed in 96. But absolutely, by in the 70s and 80s and 90s, you're absolutely right. It was completely given over. The federal government got rid of the churches, in 1969. And so, anything that people say about priests or whatever, that's before 1969. And
that's in the comments. There's a comment in there saying that, the Catholic Church was the worst for raping children. And that's ridiculous and actually a disgusting thing to say. And that's why we have churches being burnt in Canada.
Yeah, but can I agree in a small part? Because we can have a nuanced conversation, because I'm with a really sharp guy right now. So I'm loving it. I would say the problem with the Catholic Church, and I'm saying this as a Christian, I'm saying this with many Catholic friends, is that it has a requirement that the priest can't have sex.
Mm-hmm.
And so what it does, it attracts a lot of homosexuals. And back in the day, I bet some of those priests were homosexual, and some of them probably were pedophiles. So I'm not saying that these schools were devoid. I agree that the Catholic Church has a history of pedophilia, and that's being dealt with by recent popes. And at Mount Cashel in Newfoundland, St. John's, Newfoundland, they had more than 100 different, it's incredible, 100 different staff members, many of them priests, charged and convicted of crimes. I may be wrong in that. Maybe it was 25 and there were 100 kids that were victims. But my point is, it has been historically a problem. And that if you say to adults they cannot have sex, they cannot have a family, you're probably going to attract people who, in an all-male monastery, men that like men. And that's not necessarily a good thing. But but whatever the Catholic Church's sins are, because they have had some bad apples, like any organization, there's no organization in Canada that has done as much good as the Catholic Church. My gosh, the very first Indigenous people ever learned what hygiene was, what, got medicine, and were given surplus food and given hospitals and schools. These are all, way back, the Grey Nuns and the Jesuits and the, unbelievable. In Eastern Ontario,
almost all the social programs, hospitals and schools were started by the Catholic Church.
But the Catholic Church built Canada more than the British. Early, not Canada post 1867, but British North America. It was much more a French project. It was much more Christian, French Christian missionaries. They're the most incredible people. So I know you haven't cut this and deleted me for saying something that maybe not everybody wants to hear. And I apologize for going away. But this is the most important message I could ever give. I have walked in the footsteps of these people. I have met men and women who worked in residential schools, because I'm 66 and I was a long time in graduate school. And I met people, because teachers get more money and professors, the more education you have. And I met these people, and I'm telling you, they were wonderful people. And they talked about all they did to help these kids out. Nobody else 150 years ago or 100 years ago was going out, that I know, from other communities. Were there Muslims? Were there rich people? Were there, I don't know, were there people from India? Were there Hindus and Sikhs? Who were the people in early Canada? Were there baseball players? Were there, laborers? Who were the people that were going out and helping Indigenous children? I'm telling you, the churches, and particularly the Catholic Church. I think the world owes nothing but an incredible debt of gratitude to our Christian churches. Go to Africa. Nobody has done as much as Christian churches to keep people alive. So I think this whole this cursing, this smear, this indictment, this libel, this blood libel in the Catholic Church and other churches involved in the residential school system, I think, to use your words, because I'm very much in agreement with you, I think it's disgusting. I think it's disgusting to bring down, not that your viewer was wrong, because the Catholic Church has had a problem with pedophilia. But we need to look at residential schools and the Catholic Church. Even look at me. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect, I'm sure. But if no one comes up to me and goes, "Oh, Jim, you got drunk, when you're in university, and whatever, you walked into a glass door," and like nobody, I can't remember that happened, but I'm just making it up. But my point is, no one's going to say, "Well, Jim was a drunk for much of his life, but he's a nice guy now." Nobody does that. They look at me now, and they look at me in my entirety. We have
until you run for political office.
Yeah. We have to stop knocking our churches. We have to stop knocking our institutions historically. We have to respect Western values, as you said earlier. We have to respect democracy, Canadian values. They're good. The nuclear family, our neighborhoods, Canadian tendencies, like to say sorry, then you don't butt in the line. I mean, and you help your fellow man. I mean, this is the Canada I want back. So were residential schools perfect? Of course not. And the enemy of the good is perfect is the enemy of the good, but they were good.
Now, this is actually a great segue to talk a little bit about Mark Carney's father, Robert Carney, right? Robert, yeah. So he was a member of the Catholic Church. He was a headmaster at a residential school, correct? And the reason I want to bring him up is because you can correct me if I'm wrong in a second, but there was during the election, there was a video floating around of Mark Carney's dad talking about Indian kids, and that his message was that we needed to help, and the quote is the culturally retarded. Now, this was used as a smear against Mark Carney, and I watched this video a couple times, and I thought, wait a minute, in the context of when this video would have been made, he would have been correct. The language is not what we would expect now, but what he was saying is there's a whole group of people that don't know how to operate within this culture. They're held back, and we need to help them so that they can integrate into this culture, into the society, and be prosperous. That was what he was talking about. Have you seen that video?
Yeah, but remember, the woke have taken over institutions. They're against words.
Exactly.
They want to limit our thinking. They want to limit our language. It's very Orwellian. They want us to jump on words, and you go, that's one word. Don Cherry said one word. He said, wear poppies, guys, or something like that. You use guys, and he's gone. These woke censors and bullies and authoritarian twits have to be stood up to. Say this about the word retard. The word retard, because I lived in Switzerland, I'm fluent in French. Retard's used all the time in French. It just simply means delayed. You know, tar means late, and someone who's a retard is someone who is constantly late. And that all it meant when I was in school was just they wanted to find a nice way. Why is this kid not getting math? Well, he's late. You know, he'll get it. He'll get it one day. He's just a little bit late. He's a late bloomer. He's a retard. I mean, it's the same thing as saying a late bloomer. And now everyone's jumping over the word retard. But Mark Carney's father, Robert, never would have used a word to insult anybody. That's just the language of the day. And they were culturally backward. And now you can't say that. I'd lose my job again if I went to the school system and say Indigenous people were backward. Of course they were backward. They didn't have, as you said earlier, they didn't have the wheel. The height of their technology was dugout canoes and obsidian arrowheads. And you know, I mean, there was no metal. There was nothing to make life easy. There was, and so all of a sudden people come here with advanced compasses and electricity. And I mean, anyhow, it's just obvious that they're not on the same, but the woke idiots that run our school system and our universities, they go, there's no truth. Everything is equal. Everybody can have their own truth. Oh, all societies are equal, including the ones that kill albino children, or the ones that, like Indigenous cultures, they had ones where they kill kids who were disabled. They cut off a woman's nose if she didn't sleep with her husband. They killed slaves. There was cannibalism. There was headhunting. And that was until fairly recently. And the Europeans arrived and they started to ban a lot of these practices, like the potlatch in which slaves were killed, and often. And then they go, oh, how terrible. They took away the potlatch or the Sundance, where the natives and the, you know, they mutilated themselves. And then all they do tell kids in schools, they don't tell them the whole story. They say, oh, they're trying to destroy their culture. They're cultural genocidal people. That's why all parliamentarians in Canada's government in 2022 called Canada a genocidal state because of the residential school system. It's just all nonsense. As you said a few minutes ago, it's all upside down. It's a good idea that we don't have slaves. It's a good idea that we don't kill slaves. It's a good idea that we don't have people mutilating themselves. And so if you said that, what I'm saying to kids in schools, they look at other teachers in other classrooms saying, stop it, Mr. Smith. Stop it, Miss Ranji. You're lying to us. They banned this potlatch because they didn't want to see people killed.
Wow, that's I okay, so of all people, I know that I've learned that what I've been fed, history and stuff, I should think about it myself, but I actually didn't know any of those things. So that's new to me. I didn't realize that the banning was the practices that were um, horrendous. I thought they were just banning, like, you know, trading and local gatherings and things like that. I was never taught any of that.
Yeah, and you know what the main thing was? The main thing wasn't, and they even had a special weapon. The Coast Salish, for example, they had a special ceremonial weapon for splitting open the head of slaves. It was called the slave killer. I mean, it was all ceremonial how they killed people. At Fort Langley, which I wrote a book on, and I also wrote in a book on my case, and you're kind enough to allow me just to hold it up for your audience here. It's called The Scarlet Lesson. But I wrote a book on Fort Langley, and they had a slave girl in Fort Langley who was 3 years old. The reason there was a slave girl there is the British weren't allowed to have slaves, but all the men that were working at the fort married Native women who were given, traded by their fathers, and the Native women had slaves. And so there was a 3-year-old slave girl at the fort. I mean, you can't say everything about Indigenous culture was good, and we need to be honest. But they're wanting to say, no, British Canada is terrible, and Indigenous headhunting, cannibalistic, slaveholding culture was good. And I think this is absurd. And so to me, if we're going to be making comparisons, let's make comparisons. But I don't do that as a teacher. When I'm with kids in a school, I just make everybody feel better about themselves. I don't talk about the Europeans cutting heads off in the French Revolution unless it's older kids and they're interested. I don't talk about headhunting here in the coast unless kids are interested and they're older. I present people and cultures in a way that I think is going to affirm the people in the classroom. But when they get older and they want to know more, then they should know the dark side of humanity. Otherwise, they're going to have no way of surviving in this world. They have to know some men are bad. Otherwise, they're going to walk out all hours of the night thinking, oh, I can do this. There's not going to be an issue. I mean, this is it. But if I come back to the potlatch and say, the potlatch was a fraud. It was the chiefs giving all these gifts away to the people. But guess what the chief did for the rest of the year? He taxed the people or demanded the people give him all sorts of extra things. So the chief never became less wealthy. He had the power and the wealth over everybody else. So it was pretend socialism. But what was problem with the potlatch? More than the slaves and more than the slave killing, because potlatches weren't that frequent. The problem is it took people away from doing jobs. They're trying to get Indigenous people to survive on their own. And they couldn't do it anymore by, there wasn't enough salmon or deer in the woods or whatever, or buffalo in the prairies. So what they tried to do was to get them to take up regular jobs, in a mill or, whatever, or fishing or in a boat or farming, obviously. And then all of a sudden, when they'd have a ceremony, they'd go off for weeks at a time. And then who is going to feed them? I mean, how could they do that? I can't just get up and leave my family, when I was younger and my family was young, and just go off and do a ceremony for weeks on end. So that was actually the main reason, is that they wanted to bring in Victorian values. And part of Victorian values is you had to work hard. You had to be able to feed your family. You had to have a marketable skill. I mean, it's not wicked at all. It's the only way you're going to help Indigenous people. It's not by giving them, as you know, fish. It's by giving them fishing rods.
So the intention it sounds like the intention was righteous, but the outcome, maybe wasn't what was expected. I want to point out, folks, if you go and read Captain Vancouver's logbook from when he was sailing the west coast of British Columbia and exploring, and it was after the Spanish, by the way, he mentions in his logbook that when they went to shore and they met the locals there, the local tribes there, The first thing they noticed was piles of bodies everywhere because disease had ravaged their villages and like a lot of people died. They estimate between 90 and 95% of North American Indians were wiped out by smallpox, typhus, and tuberculosis from 1600 to 18 whatever it was. Anyway, in his log, he records this, and he records how nice the people were, and they greeted him, and they were of course interested in the boat and these types of things, and they offered their children as slaves, and Captain Vancouver had to shut that down immediately, and that's recorded. That's recorded history. I didn't know about that until I was in my 40s, going through the museum in Campbell River, British Columbia, when I read that logbook. So what you're saying about this, it is backed up by at least that, and I'm sure more. If people want to know more about that, like the real truth to our history, where do they find that?
Well, what you've found it already. The author that I think is best is a guy named Francis Parkman. Francis, as it sounds, and Parkman, as it sounds. And Diamond Genis is another one who's wonderful. And in other words, older historians, because historians today who get into universities are completely morally bought, corrupt.
Well, they repeat what they've.
Yeah, you have to be woke, or they're not going to get a job, and they're not going to get money, and they're not going to get published. But if I could just say one thing, and I don't have much more time, and I know we've been for a long time now, but one thing I think is really value you said. When Indigenous people die in great numbers from disease, as they did, and the disease was brought by Europeans, people have to remember the Europeans died in great numbers from disease too. Yep. Like, I don't think any human chooses to be infected by disease or to infect others by disease. Because if you infect others by disease, there's nonsense about people going out handing, blankets with smallpox. Well, the Europeans were just as frightened of smallpox as the Indigenous. But the Indigenous were more susceptible because Europeans and Asians from old continent Asians, not the migrants who are now called Indigenous, but they were migrants from Siberia long ago. But as you know, in Europe, people had animals, chickens and pigs and cows and horses. So what's that?
They were exposed to things.
They were exposed for thousands of years to herd animals. And so we've developed immunities to it. And the Indigenous didn't have that. They weren't sophisticated enough to have any herd animals. I mean, certainly north of South America, there's a little bit with the llamas and the alpacas, but I mean, essentially nothing. Now, you could say it's nothing to do with the Indigenous. They just didn't have the right type of animals. Whatever the argument is here, it was because of human biology. It's not because Europeans came here to wipe out Indigenous people. Quite the opposite. They came here to trade and benefit. And the Indigenous people, look what they're doing now. You go to a reserve right now, and they're all in modern houses with big trucks and on their cell phones or watching TV or having a beer. Like, this idea that we're wicked to bring them more advanced things. It's just complete absurdity. And these lunatics at universities that go around with decolonialism on their lips, I go, why don't they decolonialize themselves? Why don't they go live in the woods, see how long they're going to last? Why don't they, if they're on stolen land, why don't they get the hell off the land? Like, they're just such idiots. And yet they're the people that fired me. They're the people that are running the school system. They're the people that are running universities. And so it's a problem. Anyone who's got any sense and any courage isn't going to be in a high powered job. It's going to be someone who's like you or me, who are you and the important work that you're doing right now, and being a social media podcaster, and me being an activist, and fighting against the system. The hope lies with us. You're not going to get people at the top going, oh, I'm going to change all this. I'm going to, they're not going to do that. They're just spewing nonsense and keeping themselves in their positions.
Well, what I've learned is we don't know what it is that we have to advocate for and what changes we have to fight for until we hear the truth, like we do from people like you, right? There's this misconception, and I've always thought this was a misconception. Not always, actually. When I was really young, I believed it, that the First Nations, and even that word is strange to me because I'm not sure which nation was first, because there was lots of things happened in that too. But anyway, there's this idea that they lived in this Garden of Eden here. And I use that phrase because I saw you use that phrase in something. It's like everything was perfect. They're close to nature. They didn't have all these industrial things. And I started thinking, wait a minute, human beings, we're creatures of order and creators, and we do those things so that we can live better in the environment that wants to kill us. And they lived in that environment that wanted to kill us or kill them without any of those things. So I don't see how that was I don't see how that was an arguably better existence than what was brought here.
But that's it. It's worse. And I mean, it's sad that people can't even bring themselves to say something that's so obvious. There's nothing in the way that no one's traveling from. When I met you, I traveled in a car. No one's traveling by canoe. Nobody's using a dog to carry a travois. No one's in a tent anymore year round, and no one's boiling water in a deer's intestine. I mean, look, there's modern life, civilization, all people everywhere informed on it. Indigenous people had the role. They found things in plants and so forth that drug companies use today. All people were part of creating this, but some people much more than others. And the Western Europeans, the most condemned people in the world, the people that the United Nations say, Europeans don't have indigenous people. Oh, yeah. So we come from nothing, but everybody else gets to be called indigenous and get our special rights. The Europeans, and then, of course, before them, you have the Persians and the Peloponnesians. You have the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, and I think the Carthaginians. You got all sorts of people who contribute, going back even further. The Assyrians, the Mesopotamians. I mean, everybody. But you can't make Canada any better in the future of the world by all of a sudden we're going to take this small group of people in Canada and we're going to imitate them, and we're going to give them all the land and all the rights and all the money, and all the rest of us are going to sit around and smoke a peace pipe. Like, it's just so stupid. So Canada has to be proud of itself. It has to get rid of all this nonsense, forget the deconstructionism, and build Canada better. And I think in the school system, it wouldn't be a bad idea to take some of these people and put them in jail or fine them, certainly get rid of them, because they're not helping kids. As I said, they're manipulating kids for political advantage, for their own career pursuits. People like Carney and Trudeau, they're not doing anything for Canada. They pretend. They're not helping Indigenous people by giving them special status so they don't have to work, so they can just live off of others like parasitic worms. It's just so obvious what we need to do as a country. You, me, and everybody else should have the same rights and the same opportunities and the same dignity. And the moment you start placing one race above the others, then you got South Africa in the 50s, you've got US in the 30s, and you got India, a century ago. Don't want it, not going to have it.
Yeah, we've got some parasitic worms in Alberta too. It's called the Alberta NDP. They're using kids, and specifically what they refer to as trans kids, which I don't believe exist, as political fodder in order to gain relevance and make government. It's sick. Well, and you're right. We've been just about an hour and a half. I bet you we could do another hour and a half, but it's getting late, so maybe we'll wrap it up and do another one. But do you want to just maybe give people, just talk about your book for a minute? Why did you write that book? What can people learn from it, and why should they buy it?
Well, they don't need to buy it. I mean, if they want to help me, they can buy it, because I've never asked for money from anybody, and I won't. And I've been given donations, and I've just sent them back. But if people want to give me a little bit of money by buying my book, I think it's a great thing, because I'm spilling the beans. And I think people have no idea really how bad it is in schools.
Right at the top of the screen there, folks, scan that QR code. That takes you right to the Amazon page, and you can pick up a copy of his book.
Oh, you're very kind to me. But it's not my book that matters to me, Chris. It's why I wrote it is because I'm fighting back. I've written about 50 publications. I've written 2 books. This is the main one on my case. And I'm being interviewed a lot. I'm traveling. That's how we met. And I'm not stopping. I'm on X, from morning to night. I answer people that direct message me or email me or phone me. I'm trying to be a good person. I help other teachers that have found themselves in the same position that I am. But unlike other people, I am getting louder with each day. And then now a political party has asked me to be their first candidate, the 1BC, and they're wanting to, we talked earlier about bringing down this whole reconciliation industry. They're putting a movie out, which I'm in just a week's time. December 1st, it's coming out.
What's the movie?
Called Making a Killing. It's going to be all over social media in just over a week. But my book is more than a movie. My book is almost 200 pages of detail of all the things that are happening in schools and how wrong it is. And then all the things that they did to me because I dared to expose it. I mean about there's some really creepy things that are happening in schools, some really dark and twisted things. And we've talked about it already, but to have it there and have all the details. And I'm very fortunate to have Conrad Black, a noted Canadian historian, writer, and founder of the National Post, and lots of other prominent Canadians writing part of my book for me. So I would love that support, but more importantly, I'd love them to just say, like I did, just say, no, I'm not putting up with land acknowledgements. I'm not putting up with anyone saying I'm on stolen land. I'm not putting up anyone lying to me about this agenda in schools, manipulation of children, lying about residential schools, lying about our history. Canada is a great place, was, is, and will be. But we just have to get rid of these traitorous individuals who, for their own advantage, are putting everybody else down. The easiest way to raise yourself up is you put everybody else down.
Yeah, well, we're not having it anymore. Folks, definitely buy the book and read it. And the reason I encourage you to read is because these conversations are not easy to have with other people. Sometimes they're impossible because you're not going to even have a conversation with most people on the facts. Mostly it's going to be you fighting an emotional response that they've already had. They've already created an emotional bias. That's what you're going to be dealing with for the majority of the time. But the rest of the time, if you learn these things, you take the time to learn these things, then you've got the facts, and knowledge is power. You can start to have those conversations. There's nothing worse than trying to have a conversation with somebody about a particular topic, and you don't have the evidentiary, the factual foundation to have the conversation. So read the books, learn as much as you can. We did that in school. We learned some things, and then it gave us some tools for later on in life. But I'm starting to realize we didn't really get all the tools we needed. There's a lot of stuff we missed, and so it's time to play catch up. And Jim's book is a great way to do that. And it's also going to highlight the consequences of doing the right thing, of doing your duty, of speaking the truth. It's not going to be easy, but if we don't do it, who's going to? And if not now, then when? I fear that if not now, it'll just be too late, because we really are on the verge of some pretty insane things happening in this country. So it's time to take a stand. It really is. And Jim, thank you very much.
And the people that have the most faith in live in your province.
Yeah, well, we've got some amazing people in this province. We have a government that actually believes in this province and what it's intended to be. So we're working hard to make some changes.
As a closing statement, so thank you very much. The closing statement, say to you, Orwell said, "Hope lies with the proles, with the ordinary people." And to me, hope lies with Alberta, with Albertans.
I agree.
Because they're proud people who are rational thinking and know what freedom is.
Absolutely. There we go. An hour and a half. That was pretty good. And like I say, I think we could do another hour and a half. Maybe we'll arrange something for later on. I've been scheduling podcasts like crazy, trying to get some truths out there. So it's an absolute pleasure to have had you on. Pleasure to have met you, and I'm proud of you in that you're doing the hard work that few other do. So thank you very much. And on behalf of our viewership, thank you from them as well, because that's in the comments too.
Thank you so much, and to your viewership.
You're welcome. We have a good night, Jim. We will talk soon, and hopefully we'll see you sooner rather than later. I do have to make a trip out to Vancouver Island, so maybe we'll run into each other.
Wonderful. I like that.
All right. Good night.
Thanks, Chris. Good night.
Well, there you go. That was absolutely fantastic. You know, we keep asking ourselves that question: what next? How much worse could it get? And the universe or the devil always has this way of being like, oh, you want to see what's next? Hold my beer. Next thing you know, teachers are getting fired for telling the truth. They're getting encouraged to guide children down paths that are not beneficial to them. The world is upside down. So I think it's time we stop asking, what's next or how much worse could it get? And it's time for us to start saying, no, we're not going to allow it to get any worse. We're going to do the hard things. We're going to say the hard things and face the consequences for speaking truth. And we're going to do it because it's our duty and it's the right thing to do. Just like Jim is, and just like many others are. You can be that person too. And things like this, like what the Whistle Stop Cafe has become. It's become almost like a networking hub for people engaged in these conversations that want to make changes. It's a lot easier to do that when you have a group of people with you. You go on the Facebook page, you look in the comments, you know that there's people standing with you and that will support you. You can reach out to them, you can talk to each other, and you can make those connections so that when the world is coming for you, you have someone to lean on. It's very important. I experienced that, and I was blessed with an unbelievable amount of support. Many of you whom have been there right from the beginning. And that's why I can continue doing this, because I have you guys to lean on. So thank you very much for being there. Buy Jim's book, read it, enjoy it, and get ready for some very difficult conversations, because these conversations aren't going away. Have a great night, everyone. Meow. At the end of 1984, the main character actually begs for his captors to kill him. And he thanks them for reprogramming him. We're not going to be like that. The tables are going to be turned in the end of our 1984. Good night.